Joining us for episode 121 of the Oblivion Bar Podcast are the creators and writing duo behind the smash hit miniseries from Dark Horse Comics, Minor Threats. It is our honor to welcome both Patton Oswalt and Jordan Blum onto the Oblivion Bar Podcast. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us, guys.
Hi. Your theme song, I felt like I was in Scanners or something. Like it felt very 80s.
Very synthwave, 1980s arcade
absolutely.
Kings type of thing. That's what we were going for, at least.
We're huge fans of Tron.
There you go.
If you can't
Yes.
tell.
Yeah. I actually wore my Tron shirt for the last episode. A lot of people can't see that because, of course, this is an audio medium, so a lot of people can't see our shirts. But yeah, I love wearing my Tron shirt on the Oblivion Bar because there's a lot of inspiration there. So thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it. Excited to get in this conversation, mostly about Minor Threats, which, of course, like we just said, an amazing series from Dark Horse Comics. So let's see here. How do we start off here? Of course, along with artist Scott Hepburn, colorist Ian Herring, and letterer Nate Picos, what you two gentlemen have created here with Minor Threats is pretty remarkable. Honestly, it's kind of wholly original, giving this brief origin to our main characters at the beginning of each issue. And at the same time, also being a love letter to the medium and playing with conventional tropes that longtime readers will definitely get a kick out of. So
many references.
Yes. And what we ultimately learn from these sort of cold opening origin stories is that there's been this defining choice or moment that has brought these people into the world of villainy. So Patton, I'd like to start with you. Can you talk about how you and Jordan both blurred that line between hero and villain based on how these people react to those defining moments in those origin stories?
Well, there's that saying that you have ultimate freedom and that you get to choose how things affect you. So in a very, very twisted, warped way, these people chose how the trauma in their lives affected them. It's clear that a lot of the heroes, especially the Insomniac, has had some serious trauma in his life. But these people, because of, I know the phrase "one bad day" gets used a lot, but there are... we also made it very, very clear that a lot of times it isn't one bad day. It's a succession of bad days over and over and over where you feel like, or you convince yourself that you don't have any other choice but to react the way that you're reacting. And so that, I think it creates the older you get, the more sympathy and the more empathy you have, I think, for other people. I hope that you get that as you get older. And these are people that just were given limited choices and did the best that they could. I mean, it goes back to, I remember an interview with one of the guys that co-created The Wire, who took down this very notorious Baltimore drug kingpin. And he said the way that he ran his organization he ran it with the same discipline as any Fortune 500 company. He just did not have access to a BFA degree or Harvard Business School or any kind of legitimate way to make any kind of money. So he just took his genius and applied it to the drug trade.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think like there's a sense that these characters are kind of born into this hopelessness, and it's a life they all seem to want to escape, and they see their way out as, getting a freeze ray or putting on a snake costume. Is like, that's the only way to escape this neighborhood, to escape this life and lead to something better. So I think there's something about these characters not really having a lot of options, and that this is what the successful people in their world do. And they dress up in costumes, they become villains, they rob banks. So why not, take a crack at it themselves?
I've heard you guys many times say that you find the small, of course, because the story is dealing with B / C less villains, you find that the B and C less characters are far more interesting because they are not out to conquer the world. They're not out to destroy the universe. They are just trying to make it till tomorrow, to pay their bills, to do whatever. And I think you guys, the highlight of Minor Threats is that, again, like we talked about in the question, is that that line is blurred very heavily in this story, between hero and villain, just based on circumstance.
I love that idea of I am trying to live a very steady blue collar life. I just happen to be a criminal, but I have set up systems in place so that I can, put away money, save for myself. Even though I have criminal impulse problems, they do end up any kind of mini society that forms its own rules and its own form of laws I love that. That is endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think you see it, especially with Frankie, the main character, is that she's lived this life forever and it's gotten her nothing. And she wants to kind of rescue her daughter from it. But again, the only way out is to put on the mask one last time, one last job. And I think a lot of these villains have probably said that before, but you're rooting for her. You want to see her escape. And I think that's kind of the fun of these characters is part of you wants to see them succeed. Another part is like, no, this is the fun of comics is seeing that, they get locked away, they come back, they try and get revenge, they try and, knock over another bank. And it's like, when is kind of enough for these characters? What, is there a breaking point for being a C-list villain where you're in this cycle of in and out of jail, getting beat on by heroes and not really
famous last words, one last job.
I mean, honestly, that's on many a grave.
Yep.
That's one.
Well, and we kind of not to cut you off. What we kind of see there, and we should probably have said this from the jump. Minor spoilers, there's a pun. Spoilers for this story, because we're going to talk about things in depth. We would love for everyone right now listening, if you haven't read issues 1 through 4 of Minor Threats, please go read them and then come back to this, this conversation. Or if you don't care to be spoiled, that's fine too. But to kind of briefly touch on the finale in issue 4, we see maybe. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, somewhat of a status quo reset to see now that we see Frankie kind of in charge of things. Where does she go from here? And I'm assuming you guys will tackle that in the future.
There are plans and we will leave it at that.
There are plans in place. Yes. Yeah. I'll say where she ends up, I think is different though, where she began, because I think these characters they have all these other things on, A-list heroes, A-list villains, all these other things kind of keeping them down. And by the end of the series, Frankie's kind of wiped the chessboard, and she's the only player left. And I think it's a chance to kind of organize supervillain crime in a way it never has and legitimize it, as opposed to just kind of running around trying to knock over jewelry stores. Here's a shot to build something that hasn't existed before. So I think that was kind of the goal is, she can't fight who she is, but she can do things slightly differently now because of how things have changed in the city.
Sure.
So one thing I love about this story is the fact that, you have these parallels in that story that kind of relate to real life struggles. Like you said, it's not one bad day, because in any comic, you have one bad day that can create a villain, that can create a superhero, one moment, one defining choice. And just like, real life, it takes time for people to kind of have to be beaten down and make those decisions that kind of turn them into that criminal. So I appreciate that you guys have kind of paralleled that with reality. But one thing that I wanted to talk about with the characters is how each of them kind of highlights their different form of self-sabotage, because each of them has their own type, form. Frankie just wants to run away from everything. Brain Tease wants, recognition or validation for his genius, and he'll do anything for it. Scalpel has emotional detachment from everyone. Snake Stalker can't get out from under his dicey past, and we all know what Pigeon Pete did in the story. So my question is, so like at every character at some point proclaims that they are the leader of the group also. So Jordan, this kind of question I wanted you to kind of take the lead on. What came first when creating Minor Threats? Was it these flaws themselves, or was it the flawed characters?
I think Frankie was like, we had to start there. And I think once we cracked her and being the second generation villain who wants out, who resents this lifestyle, like that kind of made sense as the core character to drive this forward. And then we started just kind of talking about archetypes, right? Like, we love Calendar Man. And what were the other ones? Patton, you love the
Copperhead,
Copperhead, right?
Crime Doctor. Just people that are. It is absolutely. Also, again, there's a specific panel in Suicide Squad where Captain Boomerang goes back to his room and there's like extra Boomerang costume just in the background hanging in the closet. Like, oh yeah, you have to lay out his clothes for the week to have his costume on to go do what he's got to do. Like, I thought that was fascinating,
We have the night nurse, but who's like who's the dry cleaner of the Marvel universe? That's that's what I want to know.
But I think what's interesting is a lot of those characters that we're mentioning were kind of created in the 50s, 60s, and they were like villain of the week. They weren't given a lot of depth, at times. But we wanted to go like, why would you do that? Why would you continue to do this year after year after year? Putting on this costume, going out, trying to kind of sell yourself as this thing. And I think what we found was like a trauma at the core of all of these characters. And I think once we would kind of we had the archetypes, then it was like, well, now let's peel back the layers and see what makes them act this way and why they make these choices. And the characters kind of revealed their histories sort of revealed themselves as we tried to be like, why would you be, a surgeon to the supervillain community? Like what would kind of lead you to this life? And, each time you asked it, you would find the backstories within.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of along with that, you were kind of speaking on like how essentially the story is kind of writing itself in a way. You get your character and then you kind of just build on that, right? And this is kind of inside baseball stuff. If you don't want to answer, that's totally fine. But when it comes to like scripting out the series, how do you and Patton, how do you guys split duties in terms of like dialogue? Because you guys are sharing. There's a writing duty here. Do you guys have one issue where you do dialogue, Patton, and then Jordan, you do the character building?
Well,
how does that work
together as a pair and we just break the whole story and then we pass it back and forth. Jordan is really, really good at story pacing and and dialogue, and I'm just trying to. I just have way too many ideas for our own good, so we just have to pick which ones we're going to shove in there. World building tends to really blow my head open bigger than it needs to be. So, there's a nice give and take there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just editing, because I think we probably could do, the first series could have been 20 issues and all still be set in one night because we wanted to explore the whole world. So you kind of, you focus it on, okay, specifically the structure of Minor Threats is we're going to jump narrators each issue. Their backstory is going to reveal information that's going to affect what's happening in the present and the choices that they make and why they agreed to go on this kind of suicide mission. That's kind of the North Star, right, of the issue. But one of the other things we wanted this to feel like crime noir, and like Patton is a crime noir historian. You would pull up stuff right on the Criterion, and we would watch stuff. And I think you have such an ear for that dialogue too, that we wanted it to be 50-50 superhero and kind of classic, caper crime noir stuff. So, I think everyone kind of adds their little pieces in, and by the time you pass it back and forth, it's kind of hard to tell who added what and where it came from. It's very organic when you have like a partner who has a similar voice and kind of the same thing.
It sounds like you almost just stepped in the room and kind of immediately went to your strengths and fed off each other's strengths.
I mean, we fed off our enthusiasms.
Absolutely.
We're very, very enthusiastic for this stuff. So I think that especially shows, if I can toot our own horn, that definitely shows in the writing. There's a lot of enthusiasm and love of this genre. We're not. A lot of times there's deconstruction that happens, and it's clear that the people are like, "See, this is like we love this stuff." I'm not trying to denigrate it, even though I want to look at different aspects of it. I don't want to take it apart and leave it dead on the ground. I love it.
Now, speaking of that enthusiasm, did you guys ever just find yourself kind of side questing or losing track of staying on target? Like, did you ever just kind of like start talking about the most random like storylines or your characters or anything like that?
Yes, but where a lot of it came from? I feel like Scott's art would fill in these backgrounds of the city, and I'd be like, oh my, we always talk about Shit Eater, who's this fly character in a punk jacket at the bar that Scott just threw in there. And we were ready to derail it and be like, can we just follow this guy and see what his deal is?
Him.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that where it's like we feed off the art and it influences the writing. And then a lot of times it's like us infusing the stuff that Scott's putting in our heads just as much as we're kind of writing out things for him to draw.
Mm-hmm. Now we heard also too, and you guys can tell me if this is a rumor or what, but this was originally a pitch at DC Comics. Is that correct? For like a Batman Rogues Gallery type of story?
I had an idea for a Batman Joker story about what happens when the Joker breaks out and Batman comes down like a ton of bricks on the lower class villains of Gotham. And we had worked on it with other people's IPs, and we had reached a point where we're like, let's just build our own world now. Let's build this out way. But it was going to be, that's why I was mentioning Calculator, Crime Doctor, Copperhead, Crazy Quilt. It was literally going to be a C-list of villains who are like, Batman is, and the Bat family are making the city into a police state trying to find Joker. So let's hand him over and get a little credit in the favor bank.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, and I, although that, of course, that didn't go through. I think what you got here instead with Minor Threats is wholly original again, like we said, and just you guys. I feel like you can do much more than if you were not to discredit DC and Marvel. I clearly have a love for those two publishers, but what you guys have done here at Dark Horse with Minor Threats, I feel like is more your speed, more Blum, Oswalt, that type of deal. So yeah. And then kind of along with that, to kind of build on Minor Threats and what we've got in the future. Because again, this is 4 issues. And I think those 4 issues are great in a capsule, but I think, speaking for myself, for Aaron, and for, fans of the series, we want more, of course, and we actually recently, just this week, found out that Dark Horse announced that Minor Threats is getting a tie-in miniseries called The Alternates, which will kind of step away from the villains and go into the B-list superheroes this time around, who struggle to reclaim their mediocre life through a support group. So can you guys speak on that a little bit more, and what fans can eventually anticipate to see with the story?
Yes, Tim Seeley pitched us the story, or the general area, and brought in, and we developed it with him. And I think the idea was, he was very interested in how do you do a book of, from the perspective of, these C-list or B-list heroes who got kind of taken into a Vertigo world and lived this mature reader life, and then were brought back, rebooted back to their old lives. So how do you go back to a 2-dimensional superhero world after you've been in Alan Moore Swamp Thing, or Grant Morrison's stupid? That's an interesting struggle. So these characters have seen this potential of who they could be, from not just powers, but their minds expanded, and now they're back to this very simple, almost black and white world, and they're struggling with it. So they're in a support group, and what happens is they discover that elements from this mirror world that they were in have made it to this world in the form of a street drug. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a story about recovery, because they're trying to move past this point in their life, and now it's kind of come back, and they're tempted by it, as well as trying to solve the mystery of how it got here. So we just thought that was the coolest concept, and we're like, yes, we want to work with you, Tim.
You guys, you recently talked to, I'm going to do a quick shout out to some of our friends, Comic Book Couples Counseling. Shout out to Brad and Lisa. You guys were on their show not too long ago.
That was a great show.
Yeah. And every time we see, we're good friends with them. Brad, he and I, we're both huge fans of Saga Swamp Thing. That's one of my favorite runs of all time.
Me too.
We like goober, or, you got to eat that sexual fruit every time you see each other, because it's so trippy, that whole book. And it's incredible. It's like Alan Moore's here, and we're all somewhere in this range. You know what I mean? Like the total wizard.
So I have 2 random questions I want to throw in there into the conversation. And the first one is because I'm a huge fan of The Tick, and the setting of Minor Threats in this city, it very much reminds me of the city that The Tick moves to, where it's all up and coming superheroes and villains who are trying to just find their own way in the world. Did that have any kind of inspiration there?
I never really read The Tick. I read the early issues back in the day, and I didn't follow up on it, so I don't know that aspect of it. But I mean, there's in Pictopia, which was another Alan Moore thing. Obviously, Astro City, obviously Suicide Squad. Those are the big influences on us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know where I see Tick influence is, I remember where Chairface Chippendale tried to write his name on the moon, but he only got chopped out before he got stopped. And then it was always in the background. And I think that was an aspect we really loved, which is this idea that continuity doesn't just get erased, or the city doesn't suddenly get rebuilt, or that gets cleaned up by damage control or something. In this world, that stuff is there always. So we wanted to have kaiju bones and stuff. So I always like that something happened, 40 years ago, it's still sort of there because no one's cleaned it up. And I think that definitely.
And then the other question I was going to ask was about Pigeon Pete, and simply because, like, I'm a huge TMNT fan, and there was a character back in 2012 from that series that was Pigeon Pete, and so I was just like, it brought me back to some nostalgia back then.
There's another Pigeon Pete?
Yes.
Was he a mutant? Was
What
he
did
like,
he do? What was
he
his thing?
He was literally like how the turtles were humanoid turtles. He was just a humanoid pigeon, and he'd go around and he'd try and like eat everything and then just vomit it up.
Oh my God.
Well, if IDW wants to do a crossover, the meeting of two Pigeon Pete's, we're down.
Pigeon's Pete.
I want to know who's going to win that fight for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think there are any winners in that fight.
Yeah. They fight for a bit and then they're friends. That's how that always works, isn't it? That's how superhero comics generally work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a final question, but I also, since we're on the topic of random questions, something just popped in my head, Patton, and I have to bring this up because I don't think we're going to be able to talk very often outside of this conversation. I got to tell you my favorite cameo of yours of all time in the world of, in film and television and all that. It was in Dodgeball in the opening scene when Vince Vaughn, he's on the couch and he hears the answer machine go off, and it's you, and you're like, excuse me, whatever his name is, you've got 3 movies that are overdue. You've got Drunken Hussies Part 4, Backdoor Patrol, and Mona Lisa's Smile. I laugh every single time. It never fails to make me chuckle.
Thanks,
so
man. I appreciate that.
I just
Thank you.
Of course.
So our final question is actually, again, for both of you, is like, you both clearly have your finger on the pulse, of the medium. So we wanted to round this conversation out by just like simply asking, you guys are so busy, what are you reading, or what's in your, your backlog? We all have our huge, I'm sure you can see my stacks of comics behind me.
Oh,
what's in your backlog?
Oh God, I have a whole stack of the DeMatteis verse comics that were just sent to me, which are these.
Oh, I got those
I haven't had a chance to sit down and read those. I have. Oh God, there are so many. I mean, I try to keep up, but I've never read Asterios Polyp by Mazzucchelli, and I know I have that's on my stack. I know I got to get to that one. But I tend to actually keep pretty on top of the weekly stuff because otherwise it just gets impossible, and I know that I'm not going to ever get to it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I keep up with the floppies, but I always buy more graphic novels than I can ever read. So that stack gets bigger, and I struggle to just keep the floppies down. I think it was called, is it Teenagers from Mars? It was an indie book from a few years ago.
It sounds familiar.
Sitting there. But as far as stuff that I'm reading now, I got to say, it's a good time to be a Superman fan.
It is.
Every single Superman book is fantastic. And he's the hero I need.
It's honestly, it's crazy the amount of great Superman we've gotten, because we went from the Rebirth, Gleason, and Tomasi run straight into Brian Michael Bendis, who did a great run. People have problems with Brian Michael Bendis' run, but I loved it. And then, of course, now we have Joshua Williamson. We have Philip Kennedy Johnson on before that. Like, it's been really great to be a Superman fan for sure.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to check out Do a Power Bomb?
No, and that looks really good. I haven't had. Again, that's it's about wrestling.
Yes, so it's Daniel Warren Johnson's like love letter to wrestling, and it is by far one of my most favorite stories that I've read since.
Most favorite?
I have a lot of favorites,
okay.
Chris.
I will have to go and read that.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, he's very high on our list of artists I would love to get to do like a variant comic for us. Yeah.
We've had Daniel on the show, and he is as warm as you would think he is. He's one of the nicest people in the industry. When you meet him at a convention, he's just the sweetest man. It's like Daniel Warren Johnson and David Mack, if you're familiar with David Mack, the artist.
We know David, he's great.
Those two are often competing for like the nicest person in the world of comics. So,
well, do me a favor. Next time Daniel Warren Johnson's on the show, ask him if he wants to do a Minor Threats cover and record it and put him on the spot.
Yeah,
and we'll hold him to.
We'll try to
and Christian Ward.
So Christian actually did a cover for you guys. Yep.
Yes, he did.
He did. He did 3, and we had to pick one.
I know.
And we're like, can we just mash them all together? Because I don't want these all to see the light of day.
Oh,
have you guys read? Have you read Phantom Road by Jeff Lemire? And
I'm reading it right
Gabriel
now.
Walta? Yeah,
so good.
So this is a shameless brag that Aaron and I have to pull out really quick. We actually got we have a partnership with Whatnot, if you're familiar with them, but we actually got a custom cover done for us by Christian Ward for Phantom Road #1. It's the Oblivion Bar exclusive. Yeah. For everyone listening right now, I'm holding it up and it's as incredible as you would think. Christian, he never misses. So
that's amazing.
He's one of our good friends in the industry. And honestly, we could sit here and talk about Christian and Daniel Warren Johnson and how incredible all of these creators are, but we won't take up too much of your guys' time here. Right. We really do appreciate
thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us on. I really appreciate it, man.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Is there anything you guys want to highlight before we head out of here?
July 12th, the trade comes out.
Yes.
It was supposed to come out a little earlier, but they changed distributors, Dark Horse, so it hits the streets July 12th.
Yeah, perfect. Good deal. Awesome. Well, thank you guys both.
When does this air?
This will be out the first week of July, if I'm not mistaken. So
Wednesday, July 12th. Go get the trade paperback.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Do it.
You heard it, everybody.
Do it.
Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you soon.